A German staff car rolls through the Cretan night, April 26, 1944. Its headlights sweep across olive groves heavy with spring rain. Inside sits General Heinrich Kreipe, commander of the 22nd Panzer Grenadier Division, returning from a routine inspection. He has no idea that two British officers are lying in the ditch ahead, watching his approach. They have exactly 12 seconds to change the course of the war. The sound of cicadas fills the darkness, then silence. Patrick Leigh Fermor adjusts the German helmet on his head. He's 29 years old, speaks fluent Greek, and has spent the last 2 years living in caves on this island. Next to him, Billy Moss checks his watch for the 100th time. They've been waiting 3 hours. Around them, 15 Cretan resistance fighters crouch in the shadows, farmers who've become soldiers, men who know every goat track in these mountains. The car slows at what appears to be a Wehrmacht checkpoint. Red warning lights, a soldier waving it down, routine. The driver stops, winds down his window. Fermor steps forward, dressed in a perfect German corporal's uniform. He salutes. The driver barely looks at him. Then Fermor strikes. A single blow to the head with a blackjack. The driver slumps. Moss yanks open the rear door and shoves a gun into Kreipe's ribs before the general can speak. 3 seconds. The general is pulled from the car, his mouth covered, his arms pinned. 4 seconds. Fermor slides into the driver's seat. 5 seconds. The resistance fighters melt back into the darkness, dragging the unconscious driver with them. Fermor puts the car in gear and drives. General Kreipe sits in the back seat, absolutely still, a gun pressed against his spine. He's 52 years old, a career officer who fought in World War I, a man accustomed to giving orders, not taking them. His face shows nothing but calculation. Moss speaks to him in German. Your safety depends on your silence. Kreipe nods once. They drive toward Heraklion, the capital, straight into the heart of German-occupied Crete. This is not the plan. The plan was to head immediately for the mountains, but Fermor makes a split-second decision. The most dangerous route is the safest. No one expects an escaping commando to drive deeper into enemy territory. Ahead, the first real checkpoint appears. Concrete barriers, floodlights, 4 guards with submachine guns. Fermor doesn't slow down. He studied how German officers drive, how they carry themselves, how they treat enlisted men with casual disdain. He pulls up and leans out the window, barking orders in German. The German's car, official business, out of my way. The guards snap to attention. They see the pennant on the hood, the general in the back seat, a corporal driving. Everything correct, everything normal. They wave him through. 22 checkpoints between the abduction site and the edge of Heraklion. 22 times Fermor must become someone else, must inhabit the role so completely that exhausted German soldiers see only what they expect to see. At checkpoint 7, a young guard peers into the back seat. Kreipe stares straight ahead, Moss's gun hidden beneath a coat. The guard salutes the general. Kreipe, incredibly, returns the salute out of pure reflex. The guard steps back. They drive on. At checkpoint 14, an officer approaches, suspicious. He wants to see papers. Fermor hands them over, his German flawless, his hands steady. The officer examines the documents, while Kreipe sits 3 feet away, his mouth taped shut beneath a scarf, his eyes burning with rage. 10 seconds pass. 20. The officer hands back the papers. Proceed. By checkpoint 22, the eastern sky shows the first gray hint of dawn. They abandon the car at a vineyard outside town, leaving behind a note in German. Your general is safe. Do not search for him. This is a British operation. No Cretans were involved. This last part is a lie.
a calculated attempt to protect the civilian population. It won't work. The mountain crossing begins. 4 men carry Kreipe on a stretcher through terrain that breaks horses. They climb through olive groves, then oak forests, then bare rock. The April snow still lies thick at altitude. The general, bound and gagged, weighs nearly 200 pounds. Every hour they stop to switch carriers, their shoulders screaming, their breath coming in gasps. Behind them, they can hear dogs. By noon on the first day, German radio traffic explodes across Crete. 20,000 troops mobilized, every village locked down, roadblocks on every track, the entire 22nd Panzer Grenadier Division looking for their commander. Fermor's group moves higher, into country where only shepherds go. They hide in a cave while German patrols pass below, so close they can hear the soldiers cursing the heat, the rocks, the stupidity of this mission. The Cretans with them don't move, don't breathe. These men know what happens when Germans conduct reprisals. They've seen the burned villages, the hung priests, the executed hostages. Night falls, they move again. For 18 days they carry the general across Crete, from one resistant safe house to another, through a network of farmers and shepherds who risk everything to hide them. They sleep in cheese huts that reek of rancid milk. They drink from streams. They eat what the villagers can spare, which is almost nothing. German-occupied Crete is starving. Kreipe stops fighting after the 3rd day. He watches Fermor navigate by stars, watches the Cretans share their last bread with their captors, watches Moss change the general's bandages where the ropes have cut into his wrists. Something shifts in the old soldier's face. On the 5th night, they rest in a shepherd's hut high on Mount Ida. Snow falls outside. Fermor sits across from Kreipe, the gun now almost an afterthought between them. They're both classically educated men. They begin to talk, first in German, then in fragments of Greek and Latin. Kreipe quotes Horace, the ode about the snows of Mount Sorate. Fermor, without thinking, continues the verse from memory. They stare at each other in the firelight, captor and captive, reciting 2,000-year-old poetry in a freezing hut while 20,000 men hunt for them outside. The absurdity is not lost on either of them. Day 7. They watch from a ridgeline as German patrols search the valley below. The soldiers are systematic, professional, moving in a grid pattern that will eventually cover every square meter of ground. Fermor calculates distances, times, routes. There's no way forward that doesn't cross the Germans' path. A Cretan shepherd named Gorgos speaks up. There's another way, higher, where the snow leopards used to live before the Italians shot them all off. They climb. The altitude here is crushing. The general, now on foot, but roped to his guards, stumbles on loose scree. Moss catches him. They rest. Kreipe's breathing is labored, his face gray. He's 52 years old, being force-marched across mountains at 10,000 feet by men half his age. "You will kill me before we reach the coast," he says. "We need you alive. You're worth nothing to us dead." "Then I am valuable." Fermor almost smiles. "Yes, Herr General, you are valuable." Day 10. The German search pattern changes. Someone competent has taken command of the operation. The net tightens. Fermor sees it happening on the ridgelines around them, the systematic closing of escape routes. They have perhaps 48 hours before the cordon is complete. They abandon caution and move during daylight, a desperate gamble. They cross a snowfield in full view of a German observation post 2 kilometers away. Through binoculars, they would be visible. They would look like shepherds, perhaps, or refugees, or escaping commandos with a kidnapped general. No shots ring out. Either the Germans don't see them, or they see them and assume they're friendlies. The line between success and failure is that thin. Day 12. They reach the south coast zone but can't signal for evacuation. The Royal Navy motor launch won't come for another 6 days. The rendezvous is fixed, inflexible. They must wait. They hide in a cave system above the beach. The cave smells of bat guano and rotting fish. Water drips from the ceiling. Outside, German patrols walk the coastal path every 2 hours. Kreipe sits against the cave wall, no longer bound, but watching his captors with something approaching professional respect. "You planned this for how long?" he asks Fermor. 4 months. "And you think you'll succeed?" "We already have, Herr General. You're not in Heraklion anymore." Kreipe considers this. "I trained my men to never surrender, to fight to the last bullet. You have made fools of us all." Fermor says nothing. There's nothing to say. Day 15. A Cretan runner brings news from the villages.
Day 15. A Cretan runner brings news from the villages. The Germans are executing civilians. 10 men hanged in Anoncia for suspected collaboration. A priest shot in Chrysonas. Homes burned in Osigonia. The collective punishment has begun, despite the note, despite the promises that this was a British operation. The Cretans with Fermor say nothing. They knew this would happen. They did it anyway. Day 18. The evacuation night. They move down to the beach in darkness, a column of shadows. Kreipe walks between Fermor and Moss, no longer a prisoner exactly, but not free. Something else, a participant in his own captivity. At midnight, Moss flashes the signal out to sea. 3 long, 2 short. The recognition code that means British agents, not a German trap. For 20 minutes, nothing, just waves and darkness, and the possibility that it's all been for nothing, that the launch isn't coming, that they'll have to climb back into the mountains and start again. Then, low on the horizon, an answering light, 3 long, 2 short. The motor launch beaches in the surf. Royal Navy sailors jump out, weapons ready, scanning the cliffs for ambush. They see the bedraggled group on the beach, see the German general among them, and one sailor actually laughs out loud at the audacity of it. Kreipe pauses at the water's edge. He turns to Fermor. "I fought for 4 years in the last war. I have fought for 5 years in this one. I have never seen anything like what you have done." Fermor shakes his hand. "War makes us all do remarkable things, Herr General." They wade out to the launch. Behind them, the Cretan resistance fighters fade back into the darkness, returning to their villages, to their families, to the brutal reprisals they know are coming. They don't wait for thanks. There's no time. The launch pulls away from shore, engine roaring. On deck, Kreipe stands between his captors, watching Crete recede into the darkness. Somewhere up in those mountains are the caves where he used to plan operations, the headquarters where he commanded a division, the life he had before 2 British officers decided he would make the perfect trophy. 3 days later, they deliver him to a POW camp in Cairo. The war correspondents are waiting, the photographers, the intelligence officers who will spend months debriefing him. Kreipe steps off the boat in his rumpled uniform, dignified despite everything, and for just a moment he and Fermor exchange a look that contains volumes. The operation is a tactical success, but a strategic disaster for German morale. Hitler is furious. How can partisans and British agents operate for 18 days in occupied territory? What does it say about Wehrmacht security, about German control? The occupying forces overreact exactly as Fermor predicted. They pulled troops from frontline duties for security sweeps. They fortify rear areas. They see threats everywhere. The paranoia spreads like poison through the command structure. Crete pays in blood. Villages burned.
hostages shot. The reprisals continue for months. The Cretans endure it, as they've endured every occupation for 4,000 years, with silent fury and long memory. Fermor and Moss are decorated. They become legends, the men who kidnapped a general, the commandos who walked through walls. Moss writes a book about it called Ill Met by Moonlight. It becomes a bestseller, then a movie. The story grows with each telling. But late in life, Fermor will confess doubt. Were the reprisals worth it? Did the propaganda value justify the civilian deaths? These are questions without good answers, the moral mathematics of irregular warfare, where every victory costs someone else everything. Kreipe survives the war. He returns to Germany in 1947, to a country that no longer exists in the form he knew. In 1972, he returns to Crete as a tourist. He wants to see the mountain where he quoted Horace, the cave where he realized his war was over. The Cretans incredibly welcome him. They take him to the old safe houses, walk him through the routes they used to move him across the island. Old men who carried him on a stretcher shake his hand. They understand something about soldiers that transcends nationality. They fought against him, yes, but they respected the fighting. Leigh Fermor settles in Greece after the war. He builds a house overlooking the sea, writes books about his wanderings, becomes one of the great travel writers of the 20th century. But he never writes a full account of Operation Harling. Some stories, he says, belong to the people who lived them, not to the page. The last time Fermor and Kreipe meet is in 1972, at that reunion on Crete. They're old men now, the war 30 years behind them. They stand at the exact spot where the abduction happened, where the staff car pulled to a stop, where 12 seconds changed both their lives. Kreipe asks the question he's been carrying for 30 decades. Why me? Fermor considers the answer. Because you were the right rank, because your route was predictable, because we needed to prove it could be done. And the real reason? Because you were there, Herr General, because the war demanded it. They shake hands in the Cretan sunshine, two old soldiers who shared 18 days of terror and boredom and strange companionship, bound together by violence and poetry and the absurd comedy of war. 3 months later, Heinrich Kreipe dies in Germany, at peace, his war finally over. Leigh Fermor lives until 1911, 96 years old, writing until the end, guarding his secrets, occasionally visited by Cretan shepherds who remember the young British officer who trusted them with his life. The operation remains a case study in Special Forces training. How to plan, how to improvise, how to turn audacity into success. But it's also a study of cost. The villages that burned, the men who hanged, the price of resistance. In a small museum in Heraklion, there's a display about Operation Harling, photographs of Fermor and Moss, young and intense, a reproduction of the note left in the staff car, a map showing the route across the mountains, and in a glass case, a single item, the German helmet Fermor wore that night at the checkpoint, saluting guards who never suspected, driving through an occupied city with stolen authority and absolute confidence. It's smaller than you'd expect, more ordinary. That's the point. History's most audacious operations succeed because someone decides the impossible is merely difficult, and then does the work. 22 checkpoints, 18 days, 1 general, and the men who carried him across mountains, through snow and reprisal and the grinding machinery of war, because someone had to prove it.